Centuries ago, a small family of 70 Israelites migrated to Egypt to escape a famine. Fast forward 400 years, and that single family had multiplied into a sprawling population of nearly 2 million people. That explosive growth terrified the newest Egyptian ruler. Fearing a massive armed uprising, he decided to crush the Israelites under forced labor, putting them to work building his cities and monuments. When harsh labor didn't slow their population growth, Pharaoh escalated to absolute cruelty. He ordered every newborn Israelite baby boy to be thrown into the Nile River. The Israelites had originally arrived in Egypt as welcomed guests. Now they were trapped, desperate slaves with no political or military power. Their only way out required divine intervention. One desperate mother placed her infant son in a waterproof basket and set him adrift on the river. In a massive twist of irony, the baby was discovered and adopted by Pharaoh's own daughter. She named him Moses and raised him right inside the palace walls. But Moses eventually lost everything. As an adult, he witnessed an Egyptian beating an Israelite slave. He intervened, killed the Egyptian, and panicked, fleeing deep into the harsh desert of Midian, where he hid as an anonymous shepherd for decades. Then his quiet exile was shattered. Out in the desert, he stumbled across a bush that was actively blazing with intense heat and light, but the leaves weren't turning to ash. From that fire, the voice of God commanded him to go back to Egypt. Moses was terrified. He gave a laundry list of excuses, pointing out he was a terrible public speaker and entirely unqualified. God countered his fear, giving him a shepherd's staff and the ability to perform miracles. Despite his crippling anxiety and decades hiding in the sand, Moses accepted the task. He was now the reluctant frontman for a rescue mission, walking straight back into the stronghold of the most powerful empire on earth. Moses and Aaron walked into the royal court with a clear demand: "Let my people go." Pharaoh laughed them off, sneering that he didn't know who their God was, and he certainly wasn't going to take orders from him. To punish their insolence, Pharaoh made the slaves' lives even harder. He demanded they meet the exact same punishing quotas for making bricks, but stopped providing them with the straw they needed to build them. Moses struck back. He raised his staff, and the entire Nile River, Egypt's primary water source, turned into thick, foul blood. Fish died, and the water became completely undrinkable. Still, Pharaoh refused to yield. Next, a massive swarm of frogs overran the country, flooding into homes, beds, and ovens. The stench and chaos were unbearable. Pharaoh begged Moses to stop and let the slaves leave. But the moment the frogs died, he reneged on the deal. This established a vicious cycle. Pharaoh viewed his refusal to compromise as a display of strength. He didn't realize he was testing an opponent with limitless power, guaranteeing his own total defeat. This sequence functioned as a ladder of escalating severity. The first tier focused on severe annoyance, with swarming flies making daily life impossible. Next, strikes targeted the economy and public health. Severe disease wiped out livestock, and painful boils broke out on the people. Then, the attacks moved to mass destruction. The worst hailstorm in Egyptian history smashed their flax and barley crops. Whatever survived the devastating ice was immediately devoured by a historic swarm of locusts that stripped the trees completely bare. By the 9th plague, a suffocating, paralyzing darkness covered the land for 3 full days. The Egyptians couldn't see the person sitting next to them. Furious, Pharaoh threw Moses out, threatening to execute him if he ever showed his face again. Each strike directly challenged a major Egyptian deity. The bloody Nile mocked Hapi, dead cattle defied Hathor, and darkness overpowered Ra. By systematically dismantling their belief system, these events proved God possessed absolute power over every force in nature. The escalating plagues had run their course, and God delivered one final, devastating ultimatum. At midnight, the firstborn son of every household in Egypt would die. God provided a highly specific set of instructions for the Israelites to protect themselves. Every family was to sacrifice a spotless lamb and smear its blood across the top and sides of their doorframes. Inside, they were ordered to eat a rushed meal of roasted meat and unleavened bread. They were told to eat with their shoes on and their walking sticks in hand, ready to flee at a second's notice. That night, judgment swept through the nation. But whenever the angel of God saw a house marked with the red blood, it passed over that home, keeping the family inside completely safe. By following these instructions together, the Israelites were effectively bought back from certain death by the sacrifice of the lambs. This unified act of obedience transformed them from a group of disorganized slaves into a single cohesive nation defined by their shared rescue. The wailing in the Egyptian streets was deafening. Pharaoh's own household had been struck. Broken and terrified, he summoned Moses in the middle of the night and ordered him to take the Israelites and get out of Egypt immediately. The exit was rapid and chaotic. The local Egyptians were so terrified of further destruction that they practically showered their former slaves with silver, gold, and clothing, doing anything they could to speed up their departure. A moment of wonder. An estimated 2 million newly freed people marched out into the desert. To ensure they didn't get lost, God provided a massive supernatural pillar of cloud to guide them by day. They had finally escaped years of brutal labor. But as the Israelites celebrated their freedom on the edge of the wilderness, back in the palace, an arrogant king was about to change his mind one last time. Israel has finally marched out of Egypt, free from 400 years of slavery, but their escape route leads them directly into a geographical dead end, pinned squarely against the shores of the Red Sea. Closing in behind them is the most advanced military force of the Bronze Age. The Egyptian war chariot was engineered for rapid strikes, built with a lightweight, aerodynamic frame that allowed Pharaoh's army to close the distance on unarmed refugees in a matter of hours. This satellite view reveals the inescapable topographical trap they marched into. With the massive waters of the Gulf to the east and the harsh mountains of the Sinai Peninsula blocking their flanks, 2 million Israelites have nowhere to run. Then, a violent, sustained east wind begins to blow. It pushes with such force that the sea physically tears apart, exposing the dry seabed. The Israelites cross through this temporary canyon, and as the Egyptian chariots pursue, the wind drops, collapsing the ocean back onto the military force. The absolute destruction of the Egyptian military severs Israel's ties to the empire permanently. They are no longer fleeing slaves, but they are now a stateless people, staring down a much quieter, deadlier enemy, the wilderness. Moving 2 million people is a massive undertaking, even for a modern military. Doing it in the wilderness of Sin with zero agricultural infrastructure or established supply lines guarantees rapid starvation. The Sinai landscape offers absolutely no natural resources to support human life. It is an expanse of barren rock and sand, devoid of arable land or vegetation capable of feeding a population the size of a modern city. To prevent mass casualties, the camp receives a dual supply drop. In the evenings, massive flocks of migrating quail fall into the camp, providing heavy protein. In the mornings, a sweet, carbohydrate-rich residue coats the desert floor, an unexplained substance the Israelites call manna. Food solves one problem, but at the encampment of Rephidim, they face catastrophic dehydration. The solution here is entirely unorthodox. Moses is instructed to strike a specific geological rock formation, extracting a massive, pressurized water source capable of hydrating millions of people and their livestock. This constant cycle of extreme crisis and sudden provision acts as a systematic deprogramming. It forces a population conditioned to rely on the Egyptian empire to learn absolute dependency on a new provider. Environmental threats quickly give way to human violence. Nomadic desert raiders known as the Amalekites launch a targeted, unprovoked military strike against the vulnerable edges of the Israelite camp. Israel responds with a bizarre two-pronged tactical defense. On the ground, a commander named Joshua leads a makeshift infantry. On a nearby hilltop, Moses provides supernatural artillery cover, raising a wooden staff that secures victory on the battlefield, but only as long as his arms remain lifted. Surviving the desert is one thing, but managing the survivors is another. Moses attempts to act as the sole judge and arbiter for 2 million people. This creates an impossible bottleneck, threatening to collapse their newly formed society under the weight of its own internal disputes. His father-in-law, Jethro, observes this failure and proposes a decentralized chain of command. The population is divided into a hierarchical management matrix, appointing leaders over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. This decentralized system allowed their legal structure to scale with the population. It was the specific organizational shift that transformed a chaotic mob of refugees into a functioning, self-governing society. 3 months after leaving Egypt, the migration reaches its geographical climax. They arrive at the base of Mount Sinai, a massive, jagged peak wrapped in thick clouds, thunder, and the terrifying atmospheric phenomena of divine presence. It is here they receive the 10 Commandments. These laws operate on the precise historical model of a suzerain vassal treaty, a formal legal document binding a sovereign king to his newly acquired subjects. This visual breakdown shows how the commandments operate in 2 distinct categories. The first set dictates vertical duties, demanding absolute loyalty to Yahweh. The second set governs horizontal duties, establishing societal rights, neighborly ethics, and the protection of personal property. These laws are engineered specifically to prevent the type of human exploitation the Israelites suffered in Egypt, ensuring equity and order within the camp. The acceptance of this legal framework marks a definitive boundary line. In this exact moment, Israel officially transitions from a collection of displaced tribes into a sovereign, structured nation under God. To finalize this treaty, Moses makes a solitary ascent into the thick storm cloud resting on the mountain's peak. He remains there for 40 days to receive a complex set of architectural schematics. These blueprints are meant to solve a massive paradox. How can a perfectly holy God live directly amidst a flawed, sinful human population, without his sheer presence destroying them? The ultimate solution to this is the tabernacle. It is a mobile throne room constructed from gold, fine linens, and precious stones, materials that symbolize the goodness of the entire created world. This microcosm is laid out in concentric zones of increasing holiness, leading into the inner ark of the covenant. The physical layout of the tent perfectly mirrors the geography of Mount Sinai. The outer courtyard corresponds to the base of the mountain, the holy place to the slope, and the highly restricted Holy of Holies matches the unapproachable peak. These blueprints define the transition from liberation to relationship. The Israelites were brought out of Egypt to facilitate this specific proximity, transforming God from a distant cosmic rescuer into a localized neighbor dwelling directly within the camp. But while Moses stands at the summit, the impatient Israelites below are preparing to commit a catastrophic act of treason. Welcome back. Last time we saw the Israelites make a daring escape through the Red Sea and receive the 10 Commandments on stone tablets. Now Moses has hiked back up that steep, cloud-covered mountain to meet with God once again. Up in the clouds, God gives Moses a master set of blueprints. These are the exact dimensions for a special portable tent called the tabernacle. The design even includes highly detailed clothing for the priests, the helpers who will eventually work inside this tent. All of this careful planning points to one beautiful reality. God wants to come down and live right in the neighborhood with his people. But down at the bottom of the mountain, a problem is brewing. Moses has been gone for weeks, and the people are starting to panic. They think he is never coming back. Out of fear, they decide to take matters into their own hands. They pool together their gold jewelry, melt it down, and mold it into a statue of a calf to worship instead. They are bowing down to a hunk of metal. They have broken the very first rule God gave them, right after he rescued them. Even after witnessing sea-parting miracles, it is surprisingly easy to lose trust and make terrible decisions when we feel afraid. When Moses sees what they've done, he is devastated. He turns to God and pleads for mercy on behalf of the people. God listens. Because he is deeply compassionate, he chooses to forgive the Israelites and offers them a second chance. He completely restores his agreement with them. The tabernacle building project is back on. When we mess up, God is the kind of friend who steps in with grace so we can start over. With the relationship repaired, it is time to build. God fills two master artists, Bezalel and Oholiab, with his spirit to lead the massive project. The people bring so many donations, gold, yarn, and fine wood, that Moses orders them to stop. Bezalel's team crafts the sacred furniture, shaping wooden tables and a glowing lampstand. Then they assemble the frames and heavy fabric to construct the massive tent. When they step back and inspect their work, it is perfect. They followed God's mountain blueprints down to the very last detail. When a whole community brings their unique skills and resources together under a shared vision, they can build something truly extraordinary. The finished tabernacle now stands right in the middle of the camp. Moses looks it over, gives his final approval, and waits. Then, slowly and majestically, a thick, glowing cloud descends from the sky in full view of the entire Israelite camp. This cloud is God's actual presence. He settles over the tabernacle and moves right in, filling the tent with light. The whole goal of rescuing the Israelites was to bring them close. God wanted to live right in the center of their daily lives. And that brings us to the end of the Exodus story. Let's look back at the three big ideas from this journey. First, rescue. The Israelites were trapped as slaves, but God reached into history, pulling them from under the heavy hand of the Egyptian empire. Second, rules. God gave them the 10 Commandments to show them how to actually live as free people and care for one another. Third, relationship. Even when they made terrible mistakes, God forgave them and moved into their camp to stay close to them. Now, whenever that glowing cloud lifts, it will lead them out of the rocky desert and toward their next adventure. The book of Exodus leaves us with a beautiful picture of who God is, someone who rescues us, gives us guidance, and loves us enough to stay by our side every step of the way.